Well, that's a really tough question. I mean, it's the question that actually all of us are dealing with on a daily basis. Some people are dealing with it from an academic kind of point of view, trying to sort of research trends and predict the future based on maybe what's happened in the past and how digital especially is transforming our industry. Others of us are actually living that change. So when you say future, the future may mean like next week or next month, not necessarily 2 or 3 years from now or even 50 years from now. I would say that it's impossible to predict, but one thing that is perhaps going to happen is that basically the ubiquity or the constant availability of like cameras and microphones and you know, people being able to see what's going on everywhere will change the nature of what journalism does.
How about you?
I think my answer tends to be, well, it'll probably be a bit shorter than that, because you know the fact is, as you rightly pointed out, we're already in that. A lot of us already live in that future world. Just look around at the cameras and equipment that we have here, right? 10 years ago, you would not have been able to achieve this level of production, at least not at this cost. It would have cost you 5 times more, right? So the ability of us to use simple equipment to do the kind of production that we need is already here. And this is what I think, you know, journalism, I mean, this is what the conversation around journalism is all about these days. Not just about raising revenue, but also how do we lower the cost of doing things. And I think now we can do more things than ever before. And, you know, the cost of doing that is lower. It's much easier to learn this stuff now than it's ever been. So, you know, a lot of us already live in that world. And, you know, I think there's going to be a lot more entrepreneurial kind of work that comes out of this.
So, do you guys think that print media should survive in the future?
Oh, very nice question. I think it's useful. I still subscribe to the physical newspaper because I like coming across stories as I read through the paper, and it's like, you know, these are stories that I would never have clicked on, right? And yet I'm learning so much from just the experience of looking at a newspaper. And I think that experience still exists, and newspapers will survive. I think a lot of newspapers currently out there should not survive just because they're not providing a service that people want.
As the publisher of print product, I have a vested interest in thinking that it still has some survival, and it's precisely for the reasons maybe that Alan just mentioned. If the print product is doing a job that's different, let's say, than what the digital product can do, then it should survive. In my case, we're producing a hyperlocal print product. And in many of those areas that we're producing that product, people are more likely to look at the news and read it through a print product than through a digital product. And that's been the case in a lot of areas of the world, with local in particular. Local has managed to survive in print more so than in a national or an international environment.
Yes, because I want to tell the fact here in Indonesia. Most of the people, they are more comfortable with reading news from gadgets, from smartphones, and they have multiple sources that trusted not and so.
Yes. But you know, also at the same point to that, you know, to the point you were trying to make is that in Indonesia the internet penetration rate is about 25%. So you still have 75% of the population out in the other provinces and the other islands who don't have access to the internet, right? So there's still a market that's worth capturing. There's also a market segment that is uneducated and so therefore has different levels of access to that information, which would be really useful for TV and radio. So I think there's still a tremendous service that can be provided by journalism to those types of areas.
But what if the access of the internet is approaching the other region that hasn't covered before? I mean, once they have the internet access, they will start leaving the newspaper.
Yeah.
Or the most common here is like that.
Yeah.
So what do you guys think? Should or should not?
I think it depends how long it takes to get there. You know, if you're talking about some of the eastern lying islands, you know, on the other parts of Indonesia, the opportunities for them to get internet access much lower than, say, in Java, right? Java will get full connectivity years ahead of these other guys. So there will always be an opportunity there to reach that audience. You know, it may take 5 more years.
I wanted to give you an example that's maybe a little bit different. It's in London, actually, where internet penetration is obviously very high, and people do depend on digital devices to get a lot of their information. You probably know about the free newspaper model that really sort of was the vogue, let's say, like 5 or 6 years ago, where they were competing publications being thrown in people's faces as they got on the subway or the underground in London. A lot of those papers died. They didn't survive for some reason or another. I think one reason why they might not have survived is because they were poor quality. The actual content was very throwaway content. You'd look at the thing for a few minutes and you'd sort of throw it away. Today there's a paper that's distributed for free on the underground in front of every station in London. It's called the Evening Standard. It used to be a publication that you'd pay for. They decided to change their model and make it free. And I have to tell you that on a recent visit to London, I was there for about 10 days, and myself and my son, and here I want to point this out, that my son is younger than you, so he's actually 15 years old. Both of us became addicts of the Evening Standard.
Really?
And I think it was because of the quality of the journalism. The content was very interesting and presented and packaged in a way that, very much like Alan said, these were stories that I really never would have read digitally, you know. But because they were in this product that was given to me as I was in a captive space, which is like 20, 30 minutes on the train, I was able to really enjoy all of this journalism. And I could see that the other people on the train were doing the same thing. Right. So it really depends on the print product. We can't make a generalization about print dying.
Okay, so about the future again, would it be more globalized? I guess, you know, there are third world countries and other regions that hasn't been growing like the other countries, you know. Would it be more globalized?
I'm not quite sure I get the question. Can you repeat it?
So like this, the future, like they're using smartphones and gadgets to get the information and news.
Yeah.
And somehow in the other part of the world, they haven't used it yet. Mm-hmm. They still rely on the newspaper that comes once a day or things like that.
Sure, I think this is going to be a growing trend around the world. You know, I think as everyone gets on the internet, everyone gets a smartphone, a lot of these patterns will shift. We've seen this happen in every single market now, right? Those trends will continue.
For how long you gonna predict to make it equalize all of the around the world?
I think there are many stages to it, right? So if you remember, the first generation of internet that we got was a dial-up service. What was that baud speed? 2400 baud. And then we went
I doubt these guys remember that.
Oh yes, that's right. Sorry. 128 KB.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was 28 at one point.
That's
and then
right.
It became 54 and stuff.
Yeah. So there are many stages of development compared to where we were then to where we are now with 4.5 G. You know, Telkomsel was talking about that yesterday. 4.5 G connections, faster download speeds. You know, there are multiple stages of development when it comes to internet technologies and speed, and so everyone's going to be growing at a different speed. You know, getting people on the internet is one thing, getting them access and the right speed to that access, you know, is also a different thing.
I mean, right now when people join a package, let's say, you know, on your phone from the phone company, I guess there's like some sort of coalition now between the operators and the social networks, let's say. So you oftentimes have this thing where you get a package where you get your Facebook for free and stuff like that. Here you need to ask yourself the question, what are we looking at on Facebook? So Facebook is constantly like thinking about the feed that you're looking at. Is it consisting of articles that media organizations are writing and sharing, or you know, that your friends are sharing? Or is it people's own personal statuses and stuff like that? And there's always kind of a shifting balance between those two things, and Facebook is constantly like changing its algorithm. Do they promote people's status updates or media companies' articles and stuff like that? In the end, I think for Facebook and these companies that have really sort of taken over the time, let's say, that we spend on these devices, this is a key question. What is it that we want to consume? You know, and as more and more people get online, and the number of people using these devices, maybe the globe as a whole will begin to merge into, I mean, in the past, people wanted to consume a news product, because that was what was available. Maybe in the future, people will want to consume stories from other people, you know? We don't know. It's hard to tell. It's hard to tell.
Yeah. Okay.
What do you find more interesting? News or status updates from your friends?
That's a great
No,
question.
no. I'm not much a guy who likes to read the status, but if there's something interesting in there, I'll perhaps more like asking them about it or do some research about it. Like, oh, so the commuter line is stopped in here, or they have problem in the station, or what? And then I do some research. So
useful information. You
Yes.
prefer even that the status update provide you with something that is useful for you.
Yes, more than anger or
Okay.
hateful.
Sure.
Yeah. So speaking
Right.
about Facebook, here in Indonesia, there are so many medias, and new medias are rising, and then those medias are mostly shared by people in Facebook that promoting hates and you know, misogynistic or patriarchs like that. So what do you guys think about media literacy? I think it's important, right? To people to consume and choose what they consume in the media.
Well, you know, I'll give a stab at this one first. So, you know, I have been very irritated by Facebook's policy around hate speech in the context of Donald Trump.
Oh, yeah.
How is it that if I were to say something bad about someone's race or religion, I get banned from Facebook? And here you have one guy who has a lot of power and capability of reaching millions of people saying all this stuff, and yet they allow him to say it on Facebook? I have a real issue with that. I think, you know, politicians are getting very, very smart about the way they use social media. They are able to say whatever they want to say, and there's no stopping them from doing that. And I think that's very dangerous. Because I couldn't say the same things, but he can.
But what about I mean, I'm asking you guys, what will you do if your children or your nieces or nephews are about to consume the media that provides hate and other bad things?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I hope that the media would not do that. You know, it needs to be self-governing, but, you know, if you know, young people are looking at Donald Trump and taking his words for, you know, as truth, we need to be able to do something about that. But media literacy is one component. Teaching people how to think critically is, I think, the bigger thing.
Yeah.
Like, do we live in a society that understands how to think? Are we educated enough as a civilization to understand some of these things? So literacy is one thing. I mean, you can tell someone, don't believe everything you read. But, you know, if that person sees it 1,000 times on their Facebook feed, will they believe it? They will. Advertising works in the same principle. An advertiser can tell you something that's not true, but if you see it often enough, you start to believe it's true.
It's such an interesting topic and question, and you know, the debate is really interesting, and you see it live every day in your WhatsApp groups and in your Facebook. And you know, I wonder if when you see someone correcting someone else, because I've seen that where like someone publishes something they've read on Facebook on a WhatsApp group, which is a little bit more closed, and then someone else calls them out and says, you know, stop spreading rumors. Can you please check your source on this? And then the person will come back and say, oh, I apologize. But then a few days later, they'll do it again. So I don't know how to solve that problem, but But I think it's the natural, you gotta understand, this phenomenon of everybody being able to communicate to everybody else is a new phenomenon that we've only been involved in it for like, 5 years maybe, is its huge growth. Before that, maybe 10 years.
Yeah.
And for hundreds of years before that, people depended on organizations to handle this kind of like mass, that's why it's called mass communication, right? And before that, for thousands of years, you probably only had more local forms of communication between individuals. So we're just at the beginnings of this, and I'm sure that humanity has a way to